just a warning, we will be recording. We will be recording this session as we get started here. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Dwayne Fulton to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Dwayne Fulton. I am the Fine Arts or Worship and Arts Director at Mount Ararat Baptist Church. I'm also a composer and songwriter. I've written or composed 3 operas under my belt, one being from the Pittsburgh Festival Opera, Gathering of Suns, which is kind of similar to Blue. So I'm excited to see that production, as well as a musical composer for Trilogy Opera Company in New Jersey. And I have 2 of those operas under my belt. And I'm so glad to be here this afternoon and to discuss with you this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Dwayne. Josiah, would you please go next?
Yes, thank you, Rebecca. Hello, everybody. Happy Sunday. Thanks for taking the time to be here with us today. My name is Josiah Gilliam. I serve as the Special Initiatives Coordinator in the Mayor's Office for the Gainey administration. And for the past 4 or 5 years or so, I've served on the My Brother's Keeper initiative, which has a strong initial focus on Black men and boys, which I'll have a chance, I think, to share about a little bit later. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Josiah. April, will you please go next?
Hi, yes, happy Sunday to everyone. I'm April Jackson. I'm very happy to be here. You will sometimes hear me referred to as Coach April Jackson. I'm a executive leadership and development coach for individuals who are in leadership capacities in businesses. I focus on nonprofit support, community learning director for Open Up Pittsburgh, where we bring the arts and mindfulness practices to spaces that are accessible and inclusive and provide equity for all. I am a mother of 3 young men who are in their 20s and one who is 15. I am also don't have the gift of singing, although I think I do, but I definitely grew up in the arts. I'm from Los Angeles, so I went to Hollywood High School for Performing Arts. I grew up as a dancer in ballet, and I was part of the art scene in Los Angeles all of my life, and I am now Pittsburgh transplant, and I'm so excited to be on this panel. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, April. And of course, Tazwell.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tazwell Thompson. I'm the librettist and director of Blue, and I am returning to Pittsburgh. I was there 20 years ago. I directed a play that I wrote about Ida B. Wells called Constant Star, which had performances at City Theater. And I'm speaking to you from my home in Harlem.
Thank you so much, Tazwell. And we did see that, Tazwell, sorry. Sometimes I have a list at the end of my words. Thanks, Tazwell. We did have Officer Bradford trying to sign in. I saw him trying to get in here, so maybe he will join us in a little bit. We also have Officer Bradford, John Bradford from the Pittsburgh Police, who will be joining the panel as well. So I'm going to get started with our wonderful discussion here. The opera Blue explores several major themes from the perspective of the Black community. And these range across many different things: parenthood, family, support systems that we need, especially religious support systems. And of course, it very eloquently examines and offers commentary on the challenges that the Black community faces from law enforcement and the weight that comes from being a Black man in blue. Tazwell, I wonder if you would please start us off with a brief synopsis of the opera for those of us here who are not as familiar with it. And if you can give us a little bit of insight on how you were inspired to write the libretto.
I was approached by Francesca Zambello, who is the artistic director at Glimmerglass Festival in Cooperstown, New York. It's a renowned institution. Opera lovers come from all over the world to see opera for the summer at Glimmerglass, and I've directed there quite a number of times. Francesca Zambello contacted me and wanted to, her aim was to have an opera that spoke to the political and social issues of our time, where we are in this country, in America, and where we might possibly be heading toward. And she offered us several names, 5 of them, of librettists that she had in mind. who could write this opera. She had already chosen a composer, and she wanted to know what I thought of these librettists. And I said, well, what about me? My name is not on that list. So she was not really aware of my work outside of opera, that I had written several plays. And so she said, you know, send me something that you think might lead me to recommend you to the composer that you could indeed write a libretto. And I said, give me a couple of weeks. And she asked, why would I need a couple of weeks? I said, because I just need a couple of weeks. So what I did in the meantime is I wrote a couple of scenes of something that I felt was important to me as a Black man trying to work myself through the constant, and this was in 2015, senseless violence, police violence against Black men and boys. Eric Owens, a distinguished opera singer, African-American opera singer, and I happened to be at Glimmerglass at this time when I was offered these names. And we were talking about the pileup, it seemed, this particular summer of men and boys who were killed by police officers. And so I knew what I wanted to write about. After a couple of weeks, I sent in a couple of scenes to Francesca Zambello around the issue of Black men whose life was taken senselessly by police officers. She liked what she read, and she recommended I meet with Janine Tesori, who was a composer. We met. She had read my couple of scenes, and she said that she thought that we would be a very good collaborative team. It turned out to be exactly right. It was a wonderful team. The opera scenario, the synopsis, is, and I'll put it very briefly, it's a 2-act opera, and it is set in Harlem, which is where I live, and I know something about living in Harlem. And it's a middle-class Black family. The mother is an entrepreneur. She owns a restaurant. And we have a wonderful restaurant here called Melba's, which is owned by Melba. So I knew her, and I knew what to write about her and her background. The opera opens where she is an expected mother, the mother to be in the opera. And she calls in her girlfriends that she knew growing up in Harlem and throughout college. And she's about to have a child. And she wants her friends around her to help her through these next steps. And also because she's juggling business and the impending motherhood. The women, her girlfriends come in. They're surprised, since they're close friends, that she's having a baby. They didn't even know she was seeing anyone, much less married to at this point. So they are thrilled, but then when they discover that it's that she's about to have a boy, they're more than concerned. They are terrified at his prospects of whether this Black boy will ever reach manhood. The girlfriends come around, of course, throughout the scene. They support her. They want to be there for her with the birth of the child. The child is born. It's a boy. And the father greets his newborn at the hospital. He then shares the news with his friends in a bar scene that follows. And then 16 years later, at the end of Act 1, he has a confrontation with his son about how his son has been conducting his life. His son is a wonderful student in school who's applying to college. He loves the arts, and he is a political activist. In Act 2, we discover that his son has been killed. The father visits the Reverend for advice on how he's going to deal with the issue of losing a son. And we hear from the father that he wants revenge against the police officer. In the following scene, the mother, who has been traumatized, her girlfriends return and help her dress for the funeral. There is a funeral scene, and then there's an epilogue where we revisit the argument that the father and the son have, and then there is a reconciliation with the mother, the father, and the son. And as the curtain comes down, the son is left alone, and we find out that he is going to go to a final political protest. And he assures his parents that nothing will happen. The conflict, one of the major conflicts of the opera is that at the very beginning in the process, when I wrote my initial drafts, the father was to be a jazz saxophone player. I could write about that because my father was that. As I continued the work and I was struggling to really make a scene of what a major conflict would be, because there's no use in presenting anything on stage if there isn't a conflict. It was suggested by the composer, Janine, why don't you make him, the father, a police officer? I immediately shut that down. I did not want to write about a police officer. I'll just say it, I don't like police officers. I know we're going to have one or two on the panel, but my experiences with police officers have been dreadful. During the Giuliani administration here in New York City, he had a stop and frisk policy, and I was stopped and frisked several times just for walking in my own neighborhood and being Black. A notable incident is when I was opening an opening night of an opera I had directed at San Francisco Opera. I came down an elevator with a group of white kids who were in cutoffs, barefoot, drinking, not even out of a paper bag, but drinking out of a bottle, passing it around, loud laughter. I was dressed in a tuxedo, waiting for the limousine to take me to the opera house for my opening night. And the police officer walked across the lobby and asked me, not the kids, are you a resident in this hotel? I said, yes. And he asked me for my identification. And I said, no, I'm not showing you any identification. When I look back on that, anything could have happened to me by telling a police officer, no, I'm not going to show you any identification. I was spared, because the manager of the hotel happened to cross the lobby and yelled out to me, good luck, Mr. Thompson, on your opening. We're all excited for you, and we have tickets to see your production. This is so great that you stayed at our hotel. We've read all about you, et cetera. So the police officer realized that indeed I was a resident at the hotel. And instead of apologizing, he said to me, you can go on now and stay out of trouble. So whether I wanted to write about a police officer, and I did not, I have 4 of them in Blue, the father and his 3 buddies who celebrate with him in the bar and in the bar scene after they discover that he is indeed now a father of a boy. While the girlfriends were in fear that this child could grow up and maybe not pass his teenage years, the friends, the fellow police officers at the bar were thrilled, celebratory, and envious, because their children are all girls, daughters. And so I interviewed several police officers. I grit my teeth and found a few police officers to interview here in Harlem. and I had some insight on what their life is like. I don't know how Black police officers refer to themselves outside of Harlem, but in Harlem, they refer to themselves as Black men in blue, which is where the title of the opera that I use comes from. I also interviewed, when I was working at the Kennedy Center directing one of these, the walk-ons, the supernumeraries, was a former police officer who had resigned so that he could pursue his life in the theater. So I had some wonderful insight from his perspective as well. So that's basically, the genesis and a short synopsis of what the opera is about. I just returned from directing the opera in Seattle. It had already had a production in Detroit. It premiered in Glimmerglass in 2019. It was about to open at the Kennedy Center when the pandemic struck. We'll go back into rehearsals early next year. And there'll be a production in London, which begins rehearsals in September. And at the Netherlands, Chicago, New Orleans, and my agent just told me that Cape Town, South Africa would like to do a production of it, and Cologne in Germany. So here I am.
Well, thank you so much for starting us off with that and for sharing your story. I think it's all very important for us to hear that. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to throw it over to John, Officer John Bradford, who's just joined us. Would you give us a little introduction of yourself, Officer Bradford?
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing today? Hopefully well. Great intro. Loved hearing what he just said about actually being an officer, not really liking officers and things of that nature. But quick bio about me: Officer John Bradford, born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Was in the military, played college basketball, and now I'm a police officer to help try and change what he does not like about police officers. So that's very, very brief, but that's me in a nutshell. 36 years old and want to make change.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate you sharing that. I was going to go to April, but I think I'm going to stick with you, John, and pick on you a little bit since we just had you do your introduction. I love that you just shared that you're so dedicated to making change and to trying to help change this perspective. So I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about, what inspired you to join the police force in the first place? And have there been moments for you that have been moments of pride or some difficult moments for you specifically as a Black police officer trying to make that change for yourself?
Like I tell everybody, I'm a Black man first, and then I'm a police officer. So I'm a Black man in a blue uniform, as he said, and I've said it numerous times. But I work in the community engagement office, so that's all I do is community engagement. I go to all the schools and try to talk to the youth in the not so good areas and the better areas as well too. But basically, I hated police officers growing up. I've never called the cops a day in my life. Don't really like some police officers still. But after getting out of the military, I did not like how our government would treat us. And I didn't like how the youth felt like the youth in my city had no direction, nobody to help guide them. And I wanted to make change. And my dad said, if you want to make change, be the change. And maybe you might have to do something that you don't want to do. He told me to become a politician. I said, no, I can't lie like that. Then he's like, well, become a police officer, start there. So that's what drove me to become a police officer.
Great, thank you for sharing that. And have there been moments for you that have been challenging in the work that you do?
Yes, it's very challenging. It's also rewarding, but challenging. Do you see racial things? I have yet to. What's that? Did somebody else say something or?
Oh, no, I think there's the Zoom glitching.
Okay.
You're fine. Don't worry.
Okay. I haven't seen any racism by an officer in front of me. but I'm also very outspoken, and I do not tolerate anything that would be racist, demeaning towards women, children, Black folks. It doesn't have to be a Black person. I won't tolerate, and I'll speak up. But challenging, to say the least. Yes, it's very challenging because some officers think that this is just drugs, guns, pull people over, and they have no interaction with the people in their communities. And that's a lot of it is Caucasian males who have never been in the ghetto or whatever you would like to call it, but I call it the hood. And they have no idea how to interact with people. They have no idea how to interact with Black people as far as, being loud and things of that nature. So sometimes it's an educational thing where I can educate them, but they look at it as I'm not doing policing. I'm an outcast in police officers as well. So it's like I have to go into the neighborhoods, and in the neighborhoods, I'm the sellout, the traitor, the Uncle Tom. And then when I go back to work or the zone or precinct, as they call it in New York, I get it from the officers as well. So I get it. The only person I can confide in are other Black officers or my family. So it's like you get it at work, and then you can get it when you're out on the street patrolling as well from fellow Black people. So it's like feel like you have no support when you should be getting support from Black people in the community.
And that's very eloquently said, John. Thank you for sharing that. And I look forward to you having a chance to see this opera. I'd be curious to speak with you afterwards and see what you take away from it. Because I think that Tazwell does such a great job of kind of presenting that dichotomy of what it's like to be a Black man in blue and struggle with your duty and with your family, with your identity all at the same time. So I'll be curious to chat with you after you see the opera. We can talk more.
Yes.
April, I'm going to pass it over to you, if you don't mind. For me, when I first saw this production, I had the privilege of seeing this premiere at Glimmerglass back when it was first coming out. And there were so many themes that just struck me with this production. There's so many nuanced ideas in here. And one of the big themes we see is motherhood. The mother in this opera struggles very much in the opening of this production when her friends are lamenting these challenges and this fear that comes associated with raising a Black boy in America. And so as a mother of 3 sons, I wonder if you could speak a bit to that reality.
The true reality, and I want to say thank you to Tazwell and all you worked with to creating this opera and doing it in such a tasteful way where it wasn't capitalizing and sensationalizing the violence, but really delving into the family and the community as a whole and showing how this doesn't just affect one person or one family, and affects the entire community. So I will say I was a little apprehensive to even watch it because the layering on in the last 3 years of all the pain has been very traumatic for all of us. And yes, having raised boys for 22 years and still going, and they all being young Black men, it's been a struggle. And I thought the opera itself did a really good job of showing, one, being pregnant, being excited, having a group of friends to support you in that space. Sometimes, especially as a Black woman, you don't get to celebrate in the same way as your white counterparts do, because you do have to be concerned, not just with the issues of motherhood. Will your child be born safely? Will your child have all 10, fingers and toes? Will you yourself get adequate medical care? Will you get support? And it doesn't matter how much money you make. It doesn't matter, if you're in the hood or if you're in Bel Air or any space, the statistics show that Black women don't get the same medical care as their white counterparts. And then you're going to have this child. Will that child be treated the same? And you already know they're not. So I thought the issues that came out in the opera definitely were presented well. And to see the whole trajectory of the relationship between the mother and her friends, how they were there for her, let's talk about it. You're about to have a boy. Oh no, what's going to happen with him? And to see them go through the birth and the death and be there to care for her in the same way that they were there to care for her in the beginning. I think that was really beautiful to show the relationship and the community of the women to support. And I definitely like I can say, I can relate. I remember walking into the courtroom. All of my kids are good kids. I'm going to say that now, but we don't have, again, the same luxury to be a teenager, right? To drink or have a party or to make a mistake and to speed. Young boys like to jump in the car and speed around. We ended up having to go to court, and I walked in thinking, I'm strong, I'm okay, I can handle this. And when the judge said my son's name wrong, judge, his name is this, not that. I said his name correctly. I know that, and that's the system. That's the system. And it was very visceral for me in the end, where I had to advocate and speak up. I ended up crying. I ended up coming. It was such a deep part of myself. We answer things with our head or our heart or our gut. It came from my gut. And I, in turn, was educating the white judge in my community, because I live in a township where my kids are literally the only Black kids in the high school. I had to educate the white officer who was there to represent the police force, which there are no Black officers on the police force in my township. And, my son and his dad were really, really quiet, because don't mess with the mama bear, right? But I think it's very important that mothers be given a platform to speak their voice, that parents do, and recognizing that our children are little babies, and we nurture and we raise and we care for them. And even when they become men, there's still an inner child in all of that, and that needs to be healed and nurtured and supported. And I feel in our society, and I think, maybe you all on this panel have seen a Tamir Rice who's playing with a toy gun. He's still a little baby boy. To take away this childlike innocence from all of our Black men is not okay, and from our Black girls as well. And so as a mother, that's a layer that we have to take on. We want to preserve the innocence of our kids, and yet how can we when we know that they need to survive in the society? So all of that did come out for me in the opera.
April, thank you so much for that. That's such a vulnerable and important perspective. So I appreciate you sharing so much of that. Josiah, I'm going to go over to you. I think that kind of segues really well into what you kind of do and what you've done. Can you start off by telling us a little bit about My Brother's Keeper and the work that they do?
Absolutely. Thanks, Rebecca. So I mentioned at the beginning that I work in the mayor's office, and I've been working on something called the My Brother's Keeper initiative for several years now. And it's a collective impact initiative that was started by the Obama administration in the wake of the Trayvon Martin murder. So a lot of all too familiar themes that kind of led to this moment where the president created this initiative and put it out as a challenge with 6 goal areas that start from the beginning of a life all the way through to the end of a life, and have to do with justice involvement and second chances and all of these things. And it was up to local cities and counties and tribal communities to decide if they wanted to be a part of that or not, and then figure out what it meant for them. Here, both the then mayor and county executive accepted the challenge, making it a countywide effort. And I got involved actually while I was working at a community-based organization called the Home of Children's Village to kind of be staff support essentially, and work with all of these subject matter experts and leaders at different levels and in different impact areas, different communities, in different sectors to see what could be done, with this. And we didn't have a roadmap because we were kind of one of the regions that was kind of charging ahead on this. And it's really about this blend of systems change and trying to impact the local community however possible, right? In 2019, the then mayor created a position inside of city government to kind of quarterback the work. We have funding outside of government at the Poise Foundation, which is a Black community foundation here in Pittsburgh that actually serves the Black family unit in all of Allegheny County. We have an action plan, and what we try to do is make connections at the community level. We do regranting in some cases, or we'll connect folks to other resources. We'll highlight opportunities for folks to get trained or to get connected to others. And it's really about kind of joining alongside what's happening at whatever level it is, and then seeing what can be done to move things forward. And then also from a data perspective, trying to track the various metrics that come along with the initiative. When it was first adopted here in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, and we decided to accept all 6 goal areas, there was an assessment done that identified dozens and dozens of metrics, WIC enrollment and post-secondary matriculation and Head Start attendance and all these different things. And so we try to track it over time too, to see how are lives improving at the city and at the county level. And then Coach April mentioned the realities for Black women and girls. One of the things that was released through the mayor's office a couple years ago now was something called the Gender Equity Report. And as it won't be great for folks that are watching after the fact, but I'll put in the chat a copy of that report because it speaks to these realities. It explores the realities along lines of race and gender through system involvement, like maternal morbidity rates and various things in a number of domains in a partnership with the University of Pittsburgh, drawing from empirical data that tells a not surprising, but a heartbreaking and devastating story about folks' experience trying to live their lives and navigate in the city of Pittsburgh and dealing with systems, in place. And it can be very challenging. And that says nothing whatsoever about the past couple summers of violence. Think about George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, these other things that have rocked our collective consciousness. And COVID, another public health crisis that has unfortunately had disproportionate impacts along lines of race and gender, even in the city. It can be very stark and very depressing, but I've been very grateful to work on it because what it also means is that I'm constantly partnering with people that are making a difference, and I'm constantly encouraged by work that's happening even in the midst of extraordinary challenges and pain and turmoil and anguish. In fact, all of my distinguished panelists here in some form or fashion I've partnered with one way or another, except for Mr. Fulton, who I know by name, but I believe is Reverend Curtis still the head pastor at Mount Ararat, sir? The Reverend Doctor? Years ago, finding paid internships for young people in his congregation. Coach April and I have worked on wellness videos, a whole playlist actually through City Channel that explores ways that we can experience and embody and understand wellness in our physical bodies, whether we're at work or just trying to spend time, with ourselves. I've played basketball with Officer John and can tell you that he's tough to guard, but also has a true heart and passion for young people and spends his time, beyond what he's doing with the police force, trying to invest, directly, into people. And so I'm constantly encouraged is what I'm trying to say, because there are people out here in their respective lanes trying to make a difference, trying to row together to improve lives, and trying to make sure that something like the Gender Equity Report isn't prophecy over the lives of our young people, that we understand that there are these challenges and that there's this history and that there's all this heartbreak and anguish. But our message to the young people is that they can live a life of purpose and of meaning, and they can achieve their goals and their dreams, and that we as adults are trying to make sure that they know that's possible. And what we're trying to do where we work is make sure that the systems respond, as such. And coming out of COVID, I think it's been very clarifying for people what the challenges are when we've kind of had this extraordinary shared experience. And so for me, I actually sense a real season of opportunity to make real change, but also to get very clear about wellness at the systemic, community, family, and individual level, so that we are all kind of, navigating as we can, but ideally moving from survival to thriving and enjoying life together here in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County.
So thank you for that. That's very hopeful. And I just want to say for the record, I did not know anybody here was friends before we got this panel. It was a lucky, happy coincidence that so much collaboration is happening in our great city.
Well, that's Pittsburgh for you. What can we say? It's a small town, 90 neighborhoods, but we're all in kind of a degree or two separation, away from each other. And that also gives us a real chance at being successful.
Absolutely. I'm born and bred in the Bronx, and I chose to live here and raise my kids here because I think that there is a lot of hope in our community, a lot of desire to make change, which is really lovely. I'm going to stick with Josiah for a second because I'm thinking about something that April brought up, but that I think any of our panelists can speak to here. But Josiah, I'm going to throw it to you first, but anyone else feel free to jump in here. April mentioned how there are these unwritten rules that exist for a lot of Black youth and for a lot of Black members of the community in general. And this is something we kind of see very pervasively in the opera as well. There's a scene where the father's instructing his son on how you should act and dress and move about the world so that you're not basically a moving target. And I wonder, Josiah, if you can speak a bit about that, the reality of that in the community, but also if you can delve a little bit into the special relationships we see between Black fathers and Black sons. Any challenges that come across that you've seen in your line of work, or things that are very indicative of that special relationship?
Sure. Well, I think life is complicated enough. It comes with its own mischances and misfortunes enough without having to deal with the perception that folks can experience along lines of race and gender in society, and certainly, in Pittsburgh. Certainly my father had very similar conversations with me. He's a pastor though, so he couched it in scripture, this idea of behaving beyond reproach. But then also this idea too, which is something that I kind of point to more and more, I find in my chances I have to be in mentoring situations and stuff like this, where there's this idea of like not letting anyone look down on you because you're young. And I kind of also add race to that and say, don't let anyone look down on you because of your race. That was couched in scripture when he would share with me as well. And the kind of second part of that comes with this exhortation of you actually becoming the standard yourself to those around you of excellence and dignity and all these various things. And so that's the kind of charge I try to take. Like, yes, there are these unfortunate realities that come with existence, on Earth and in society in the United States and in Pittsburgh. And it makes sense to spend time with them to understand where you come into the story in the context of history and in the context of your own culture and racial, gender, sexual orientation, all these different identities that a human being can have. But at the end of the day, life is also about how you choose to navigate despite these things and perhaps even in spite of these things. And I'm not trying to dismiss any of the very real challenges, but my message to young people, my message to my younger siblings is to take responsibility to be that example yourself. And again, life's going to come with mischances and misfortunes and injustice. But every time you make a personal decision, move in a different direction, you're the universe responding in a positive way. And if you do that with others, and if you do that intentionally through systems change and understanding the levers of power and influence that you have at your disposal, you can maximize your impact. And I feel like, I feel like sometimes people think undue optimism. I actually think it's the best time to be alive ever. I think it's the best time to be Black in the United States of America, ever. And my family goes back to both sharecropping, and slavery. So I stand very much, with a long tail behind me of people that sacrificed so that I could have the chance to be who I am today. And I'm very grateful for that. And I want the young people that I come in contact with to feel, not just, take my word for it, but to feel a sense of optimism and an excitement themselves that, when they wake up in 2022, that yes, that's a blessing. And yes, they should be grateful for that. But also, as the mayor likes to say, let's go get it. Like this is the best time to be alive. And nothing will be withheld from us if we row together, if we strive after what we'd like in unison and try to leave a slightly better society, ideally a much better society, to those that are coming up now and coming up after us than we did before. You think about what just happened in the Supreme Court in the past week, this monumental, wonderful, historic moment. And you'd love to see these firsts take place. I get excited about the first, but I also get excited because she now gets to be excellent. And then the ones coming up after already have this model where it's not about achieving something that's never been achieved before, but it's a standard of excellence that you can strive for. And I think if you look around, whether it's President Obama or Vice President Harris or what have you, and in various sectors and different industries, if you're a Black youth, you do find these examples. And it's very cool to have exposure to them, to in some cases see them happen during your lifetime. But now that we have the internet and such availability of information, to be able to spend time at the excellence of time before. I mean, there's a jazz club downtown that I like going to called Con Alma, and they strive to honor the history of jazz here in Pittsburgh. And you start to scratch the surface as someone who was born here but boomeranged in and out. You start to scratch the surface of the heritage that's around you in this city, and you're just like, you're blown away by the sheer excellence. Like it is, I have learned so much, and I am barely at a tithe of the excellence that has been embodied here in the city, much less places like Harlem and New York City and other places around the world. You can be a part of that. My message to young people is that is your legacy, and you can embody that in your time. And your point is to take it to the next level. However it is, for you, you don't have to be a jazz musician to be excellent. You're here with your own unique talents and gifts. But anyways, that's how I think about it. I am not a father. as of yet. So I can't speak specifically, to that, but that's how my father encouraged me. And that's how I try to encourage my mentees to kind of be asset and strength based in the midst of the challenges, like, hero's journey style, like, yeah, slay these giants and be your best self. And you'll unlock other people by you walking in your purpose and passion.
Thank you, Zaya. That's very inspirational. Before I go on, would any of the other panelists like to comment on that?
Well, I'm not sure that I go ahead, April.
Thank you, Tazwell. I, not being a mother, first of all, have been in direct witness of father-son relationships. But what also struck me about the opera itself, I loved, there was one line where he's like, I don't need this right now. I need the fire the next time. And I don't know Tazwell, but I was like, oh, James Baldwin.
Yes.
I don't know if that's what you were thinking when you wrote it, but that's what I was thinking. And so in listening to Josiah, which, yeah, I have worked with him, it's wonderful. I'm a different generation than Josiah, much, much older. And I think I've been very encouraged by the youth, especially in these times. And we know our history because it helps to guide our future. And so I've seen the social injustices and the movement towards justice being another reflection of the civil rights movement, right? It was the youth who did that. Dr. King said, get the students, get the children out there. They won't serve as much time in jail and whatnot. And when I look at the dynamics of the relationship between the father and son, that's what I see, a generational dynamic. We have to survive as a race and as a people. And in order to survive, don't look people in their eye. A white man, hold the steering wheel at 10 and 2 when you get stopped by a cop. Watch what you say. And yet at the same time, speak your voice, be proud of who you are. Don't let anybody put you down. And it's a very fine line. And I think men teaching their boys how to be men and how to survive. It's challenging. How do we go from survival to thriving? And how do we navigate all the injustices that are layered on us because, we are constantly oppressed. So I thought the opera did a good job of that. And it's still a dynamic that we're continuously working through. Tazwell?
I'm not quite sure that I would completely agree that this is a great time to be living as a Black man or a Black boy or an African-American, period, in this country. I think the challenges and obstacles have become more difficult, more challenging, more impossible to overcome. To just breathe freely as a Black person in this country is very, very difficult. There was an incident at a mall a couple of months ago where this young Black boy who, because his father told him, stand up for those who are unable to stand up for themselves, stood up against this bully in a mall. And the bully was older and taller than he was. And this bully, it was a white boy, threw him down on the ground and on the floor and started to punch him. The police came over, pulled off the white boy, sat him down on a sofa, patted him on the shoulder and said, "Are you all right?" Meanwhile, the white police officer woman had her knee on the neck of the Black boy, and the other police officer came over and handcuffed him and took him away. Nobody spoke up about, no, it's the bully who started this, not this Black boy. And this Black boy was following the examples of what his father taught him. Stand up, for those who are being treated unjustly. I watched and it really turned my stomach. I was disgusted as I watched the hearings that Kalani Jackson Brown had to endure as she was being questioned by the Republicans in her hearings as Supreme Court Justice. If you look at her record, and you can look up her record, actually, it's on public display. She is more qualified than any other previous Supreme Court justice ever. And yet she was treated extraordinarily disrespectful and rude, and it was horrifying to watch. This is the challenges we have. Here is this woman who has several cases behind her, who is a judge. And the previous judges who were just appointed under the Trump administration doesn't even come anywhere near what this woman has in her resume. And yet she was so profoundly treated with such disrespect. It was really tough to watch. I just think that it's with COVID added on, and what's happening in the world in terms of a possible war that we may or may not enter into in the Ukraine, and inflation, and the pandemic that seems that there might be another surge coming. It's all of that is hard enough, but then to add that as a Black person in this country, I wish I could share your optimism, Josiah, but I do not. It's difficult, and I certainly need to get out of bed every morning and have something that I can look forward to. My work with fellow artists, my neighbors, my friends, and that's all good, and that's all positive. But outside of that, the world has to deal with me. I have to deal with the world. I get on a bus or the subway, or I get on an elevator, and women hold their purses to themselves. I've been in where was I? In Washington. I was getting on an elevator at the Kennedy Center, where I was directing an opera, and the two women who were on the elevator got off the elevator. It was not their floors, but they did not want to be on an elevator with me. I have, no matter where I work as a director in the world, those first couple of days, I am always questioned. How did I get this job? Do you know what you're doing? Do you really want to work on that today? I've been doing what I do since the mid-'80s. And yet there's always that possibility that I was somehow included to be in the room, much less running the room and owning the room and being in charge of the room, that I don't know, did I slip in somehow? Was this a mistake? And it goes on. That's all I have to say for that.
Tazwell, thank you very much for that. That's actually a really good way to kind of bring in Dwayne Fulton here to the conversation. One of the things that this opera really speaks about, especially in the second act, is this continuous support that is needed in the Black community. And Tazwell, you spoke so well just now about the momentum you need, the motivation you need to get up in the morning, your art, the community around you, your friends, the people that can support you through your day, the things that support you through your day. And Dwayne, I wish you could speak to us a little bit about how religious support plays a role in that. In this opera, there's a really very powerful scene that Tazwell mentioned when he was giving the description, where the father, this officer, comes in, had lived his life really all about his duty, but when his son was brutally murdered, he decides he wants to get revenge. He wants to take it into his own hands. And the Reverend tries to calm him and support him. And he's very volatile towards the Reverend, understandably. The grief is just so much to bear. But the Reverend keeps patient and calm and supportive to him and his needs. And so I wonder if you can speak a bit to that, about how religious support helps those in the community when they're going through trauma and going through this horrible time.
So when I think of history, going back to maybe civil rights, even early Jim Crow, when the Black family was constructed, the one thing they did was take their families to church. And stats say that 18 in the 20s, we were getting married, and we would take our families to church. Church was a place, was a refuge. Church was a safe place. It was also a place where we met to discuss things that were going on in the community. It also was a place of learning. Fast forward now, that paradigm has shifted. So people aren't getting married in their 20s. They're not having kids at 20 and 18, but they're getting married in their 40s and 50s. And I also have a group of millennials, Black Male Forum, and when I talk to the kids, there's three things that came out: that they don't trust the big three, and the big three meaning religion, education, and government. And so how do we tap into some of these youth to bring them back, to bring that trust back? Because not all pastors and priests are bad, not all government, not all police, they're not all bad. However, it only takes one to put that in your mind. So the one thing that I liked about, based on the question that you said about when the father went to the church to seek refuge, to seek understanding, I think we did a poor job in saying that you don't question God. And what I understand about my own relationship with God, God is not offended by our questioning. So God wants authenticity. And when you bring that pain and that authenticity, God can then begin to speak to that. There's a scripture that we talk about, that those who are in Christ, that there's a peace that surpasses our own human understanding. And so when these situations occur, that's my first inkling, is to pray that God's peace. That doesn't mean that the emotion ceases or that joy comes, because grieving is a part of that process. But that peace would come so that decisions wouldn't be made like the revenge and getting even and those types of things. So a pastor's job, or a minister's job, or someone who is in the Lord, who someone comes to them to have that kind of refuge or that kind of understanding, has to be very discerning of how to talk, and here's another thing, especially with young folks, that adults do a poor job, or maybe of it, based on what they said, is listening. We always want to tell them, but can we sit back and really listen to their pain, and listen to be able to offer some solutions in that manner? So I think being authentic, it's all right even to be angry. You can't suppress those emotions. God understands. There's been instances in my life that practicing that, seeing God move in those ways. And even some of the situations within the city, the first place when that comes, I think Pastor Curtis opened up where he allowed the community to come into the church. Very little said, and he allowed them to express themselves and their anger about what was going on as it relates to social justice. So we have to get back also, because we brought our families, our communities, our schools to the church. They don't come anymore. So the church has to go and get them. So our youth program, we don't wait for the kids to come. Our youth ministers are in the schools, and they're building relationships with the kids. So even when the kids get into trouble, they don't have to call the police all the time, but they can call those ministers. I have about 15 youth that when they're in trouble, 24 hours a day, they have my phone number, they call me, and we're able to wrestle with whatever they're dealing with. So I think one of the main things, there's a book called Canoeing the Mountain. The paradigm that we used of them coming, you just come to church. So the book is about canoeing the mountain, that you cannot canoe a mountain. You need the AV to get up this mountain now. So we have to shift our approach as to how we are to minister in these types of situations, if that speaks a little bit to the question.
Oh, absolutely. I'm wondering if you can share a story of how you yourself maybe had to deal with a difficult situation, with helping someone come through a traumatic situation.
Sure. Wow, there's so many of them. I think through maturity and being able to go through my own trials, I think the one thing that disarms people when you have the title pastor, minister, reverend, apostle, and all these things, they put their guards up. But when you begin to let them know that you have issues as well, and that I'm a man, and I've been down the road. I grew up in if anybody grew up in Hazelwood, St. Clair Village doesn't even exist anymore. I was born in St. Clair Village, went to Hazelwood. My dad dealt with drugs and things. So when I begin to peel off those layers of things that I've experienced, they disarm themselves, and they're able to talk about their own situation, their own home life, and things of that nature. Now we're at a place where I can offer some solutions, and I can not only offer them, but walk them through it and be available to them as they're going through. You know, a failing doesn't make you a failure. And you know, so those types of messages and validating their anger, but where to place that anger is key to that. So, you know, one instance, a young man who Presley Ridge was troubled youth. I saw potential in this young man, but you know, the system was giving him Ritalin and all these other things that would, you know, tell him he was a problem kid. I found out, no. I said, let's get him tested for, he was a gifted kid, and he had to be in more challenging types of room settings so that he can learn. Long story short, after he began to believe in self-worth, he went back into the main school district. Now he is a major computer guru in Atlanta, running his own business, where the system told him he was nothing, wasn't going to be anything. And so the onus is on us to tell our stories in authenticity, and then to show that how we've came out of that, and then hopefully we can walk them and aid them through their journey as well.
Thank you for that. That's very, very inspiring to hear. April, I want to ask you the same question. I know in your practice, you deal a lot with helping people move through trauma. And I'm wondering if you can speak a bit about how you would advise someone in an incredibly challenging, horrific situation, such as this opera one, with the loss of a son or the loss of a loved one. How do you help your clients with moving through trauma?
So my background is in mindfulness. I've been teaching yoga for a long time, many, many years, a couple of decades or so. And I bring that to my coaching practice because I find that human beings, especially in American society, we're taught to disconnect from our human bodies, and we compartmentalize things. And that helps our system. You know, it helps you be a mom, be a dad, go to work and function and be productive. However, when we look at the statistics of high blood pressure, diabetes, diseases that really affect Americans and are even more exasperated in our Black and Brown communities because of racism, microaggressions, the stress is just astronomical, and it's literally killing us. You add on trauma that happens, somebody who gets shot, a family member who dies of COVID, you add on you being fired unjustifiably, escapism happens. So we escape into TV, we escape into sex, we escape into drugs, we escape into eating, we escape into working out too much. There are healthy addictions and unhealthy addictions. So when I have a client who's very anxious, I've had clients come in just highly anxious, and you can't think rationally, you cannot make a good decision. When we're stressed, we're in fight or flight, and our body, the physiology of our body makes it so that, you know, back in the day, if you're being chased by a bear, that's not the time you want to stop and use the bathroom. You know, that's not the time you want to eat a snack. So in your body, your heart rate increases because you need more blood flowing through your body so your muscles can be activated and you can run. Or you slow down your digestive system because you want to preserve the energy in your body. You want to conserve it so you can freeze and hide. Stresses that happen to us now, our computers break down, we get fired, something happens, somebody says something wrong, or something can trigger a traumatic event that's happened to you before, violence or abuse. and you're so disconnected from how you feel, you try to function despite it. So my intention is to take care of those who are suffering, to take care of ourselves. Sit down, take a deep breath. We throw around this euphemistic word, self-care, self-love, take care of yourself. No, it's real. Take a deep breath, take a nap, rest. How are you feeling right now? Is your heart rate up? Do you feel your heart beating really fast? Did you know if you sat down and took some deep breaths, you can literally slow down your heart rate? That can give you more capacity to think in a clearer way, that you are making decisions for yourself and you're not making decisions based on a systematic viewpoint. And so exercises and breathing, I teach people, tapping methods. I teach people how to move their body in ways that are conducive for them. And in turn, it helps us sit with the pain. It helps us sit in the anger. Like Reverend Dwayne said, it's okay to have these emotions. And sometimes we are taught that it's not okay to have the emotion, especially don't be an angry Black woman. Don't be an angry Black man. Don't exhibit those emotions. And so you deny yourself that. Well, how are you going to navigate through something if you don't identify what it really is? So that's what I do with my clients. I give them space and I try to create a safe space for them, but only you determine what is a safe space for yourself. And so they're just tools and practices that I use when I'm meeting one-on-one with somebody to help them. And again, I'm just kind of co-coaching. We have answers to us. We know what we're thinking. We know what we're feeling. Often when you give somebody the space to be able to verbalize that, we can navigate through it together.
Thank you so much for that. I think that we can all learn from that advice right now, especially in these times that we're all going through. So thank you. I want to turn it back now to some specific questions about the opera and the process that Tazwell went through creating this. So Tazwell, I want to ask you, in this opera, there are so many powerful moments. Can you share one scene that particularly stands out to you that you would love people to latch onto, to keep an eye out for when it comes up in the production? And what do you hope they take away from that?
Oh, I don't know how to really answer that question. They were all, they all feel like my children scenes. Some were very difficult to write and painful to write. And others I took great joy and comfort and excitement in putting it down on a page. The opera, the drafts I went through were at least 6 or 7. And I think the one scene that feels powerful to me is the scene between the father and the son at the end of Act 1. Although I also love the scene with the father and the reverend and the women returning back to Harlem to literally dress the mother to go to her son's funeral. But the end of Act 1, the young son, he's just turned 16, and his father, who's a police officer, they have a very intense argument. The son doesn't understand and ridicules the father, mocks the father, that he is wearing what he calls, the white man's clown suit, and that he is he's trying to make the father understand. Don't you know that the white community despises you, and that it's an embarrassment that you are my father. I can't bring home my friends. I don't even like to admit that my father is a police officer. And the father, of course, in a different generation, he has had to give up what his dreams were, because he wanted to have a family. He fell in love and wanted to start to raise a family. And he's, that his son is now attacking him for who he is, and what he stands for hurts him. So they battle it out. They're really battling for territory of the heart. The son really wants the father to say, and he can't say it to the father, if you could only put your arms around me and tell me that you love me. And the father is saying you need to respect the law, and that I stand for the law, and that you are a Black boy, you're a target, and the things that you have done, just little and big things in protests, peaceful protests perhaps, but also just jumping over turnstiles and having the gall to spit in the face of a fellow police officer that he's only alive perhaps because of the father happens to be a fellow police officer. So they really go at it. And without telling too much of how the scene ends, I find that scene to be, for me, the most powerful. It was very important to me that the police officers, all four of them, are responsible men, are men who care for their community, who are proud of their race, who love their families, who go out day after day in a world of combat, literally. I also love the scene, the opening scene with the women, to see that shared camaraderie of sisterhood, how these women who grew up together as girls, went to the same college, and then dispersed. One is perhaps a teacher, a lawyer, a doctor, and here is the mother-to-be who is an entrepreneur, owns her own restaurant. They all come together. The scene is full of fun and joy and celebration as they reunite. But then the scene turns into something else when they just are sure that the child to be born is going to be a girl. And they're looking forward to naming the child and being the aunts of the child. And then when they find that it's going to be a son, suddenly the ground shifts underneath them, and they point out to her, you can't bring this child into the world. You need to leave the country. I mean, it's done with a certain amount of tongue in cheek, but nonetheless, it's impactful. I mean, they're not saying have an abortion, but they're saying you need to go somewhere else and have this child and bring up this child, because this boy is never going to have a chance. And they go at her with this theme. And when the mother tells them, no, this is my son, and I love him, and I need for you, my closest friends, to love him too. And she points out briefly just why it is important that she has the love and support of her girlfriends. And so the scene turns. So I love that scene, and I enjoyed writing that scene. It wasn't painful at all. It was a great time for me. And the scene with when the father goes to the bar and sees his friends, his fellow police officers, watching a football game, and he announces, I've just given birth to a baby boy. They're thrilled and they celebrate, but they're also wondering, how did that happen? How did you do it? We've been trying to have a boy and you had one on the first try. So I love the humor that Act One demonstrates in the opera, how the lifeblood of the Black community in Harlem, their survival mechanism is through humor, through food, through the church, through the camaraderie of sisterhood, through these 4 Black police officers who have each other's back. That was very important to me. And I said at another panel, you come to this opera for the party, and then in Act Two, you need to stay for the pain. I think the end of the opera, when the family is reunited, is that a real moment that's happening? Is that something that actually did happen? That the mother, father, and the son were able to come together and sit down at the table and have a peaceful moment of prayer before they eat this spread that the mother has prepared for them. And she goes on and on about the different types of foods that the father loves and the son loves. and she wants to bring them together in a form of reconciliation. So I enjoyed working on this opera, and it took a couple of years. It was painful at times, but in the end, it was for me an emotional accomplishment. I've written other plays. Another play that I love that I wrote was about the Fisk Jubilee Singers, and that was all pleasure. There's 43 Negro spirituals in that play. It's really an opera. But this one was significant because I think as an artist, it's important to address what's going on in the world. I think that's part of what we are as artists, those who create books of poetry, who paint, who, yes, April, you're right, the fire next time. James Baldwin is my hero. And so I did borrow that line in the scene with the Reverend and the Father. But I think it's important as artists, especially today, that we address what is happening around us. It could be done with musical theater. It could be all fun and games. But I do think that our worth here, the talent that we were given, has to respond to what's going on in the world. And I'd like to think I'm an optimist, but the days have been very trying the last couple of years, especially through this last administration. And I find that while I do counsel young men in my community, I've been brought to a high school that is around the corner from me. I was the head of the opera department at Manhattan School of Music. While I can say these inspiring words to them, nonetheless, they have to walk out into the street and they have to, prepare to encounter the world in a system that almost feels like it's apartheid South Africa. So I think this is a long way of my saying that the final scene in Act One is, to me, the most powerful. The other scenes in the opera, I think, as April has pointed out, you'll come away with different things affecting you and impacting you. And finally, I would like to take April with me wherever I go to direct this opera, because she's fantastic agent for the work, and I appreciate it, April.
Tazwell, thank you so much. That's so eloquently said, all of that. I think there's nothing more to say about that. That was so beautifully said, and it's true. You come for the first act, which is full of life and party and fantastic moments. And my favorite scene is that final act of scene one, final scene of Act One. And then you got to stay. You got to stay for the medicine at the other part, because that's the only way to grow and learn from seeing this production. Tazwell so beautifully kind of summed up my last question for the panel. And so I'm going to pass this around to the rest of the panelists to comment on, and then I want to leave a little time if anyone has any questions from our group today. So Tazwell, I think you were like reading my mind here, because I was perfectly going to segue into this concept that sometimes art can be uncomfortable. Moments of this opera can be uncomfortable for people to watch, whether that is because of having that lived experience themselves, or just the fact that it's easy to turn a blind eye to the realities of pain for other people. And art does have this responsibility to help us through these difficult moments. We see this across art forms, I guess, as Tazwell so perfectly said. So I want to open this up to the other panelists. How can portraying these uncomfortable moments through this medium of opera help audiences grasp these concepts more deeply? Josiah, I'm going to pick on you first, because I see you right in front of me.
For me, a lot of the work, I'll just start very personally, a lot of the work that I do is very, kind of data centric and data forward. So we're looking at stats, we're reviewing the most recent incidences in communities with law enforcement or street outreach workers. We're looking at trends and things, like that. And art, for me, allows me to kind of grapple with these realities and these themes in like using different parts of my brain, if that makes sense. And in a immersive experience where I can kind of play with it. It has a different texture, and I can kind of explore those themes in a different way. And as far as opera, itself, I have limited exposure, to it, but it's not something that you encounter in like the mainstream media landscape, as much. And I think it can provide an experience for folks to have a new and a novel experience with things that we unfortunately have to see too much in community, but then you can draw from it using the art, ways to understand it yourself, but ways to move forward too as a person and as a community.
Thank you, Josiah. John, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Sorry, what was the question again? I got a little distracted, sorry.
No, I'm not telling you you left out. That's okay. The question was, how can opera specifically, or art in general, help us understand a deeper nuance to these big issues that we deal with every day?
I was paying attention a little bit, so I sort of heard what Josiah said about how it helps him open up his mind to different parts. It opens up his mind to different parts of his brain, things of that nature. So I think this opera it hit spot on to being a Black officer. So I think it can help out a lot. We just need the youth to grab hold of the art. I don't know how many youth would be so into the art form of it, but I think that'd be the biggest thing is that I see with my job would be to try to connect the youth with the art.
No, a great point. And we have a quite a robust showing of youth coming to our matinee on the 28th. So if you come to that, John, you'll see a lot of students there. Dwayne, I'm going to pass it to you.
So, correction, Miss April Jackson, I am not a reverend. Don't put that title on me.
Maybe you should be, Dwayne, no pressure.
Look, I'm just a musician who loves God, but I've been on this journey as I'm getting ready to turn double nickels, 55, that conscious about doing music that matters. Because what I understand about music, with music, you can create any, when I say any atmosphere desired. Love, joy, happiness, anger, a lot of things that, I was a basketball player as well. There were certain types of music that I would listen to get me motivated, depending on the mood. Music is also the only medium, the only art form that can enter a person's conscious, that can enter a person's soul without their permission. That's the power of this gift that us musicians and us artists have. So that there's a responsibility there. That's why when I say that, there are songs that you don't even like, but you know the melody, you know the hook, and those types of things. So understanding that power, the responsibility of the music that I create, that make it, it has to matter to whatever the content or the context that I'm writing it for.
Thank you, Dwayne. April, last but not least.
My heart is so full with today's discussion. Thank you. And I'm from an artistic family. I have so many in my family, and I'm so thankful to my own mother, who despite anything would put us on a bus and send us to the ballet. And we lived in Los Angeles. You could go to see art in the park. You can go to the Shrine Auditorium. Like, we were exposed to so much. And in the beginning, there was art. There was no TV. We were looking at a concert, my son and I showed him. I said, do you notice no one's on their telephone? And it wasn't to preach to him or anything. It was The Summer of Soul that just got an Oscar, first of all. And I watched it a long time ago, and I revisited it. And I said, this is what social media was. It was wonderful to go watch entertainers and to listen and to hear. And, art is education. We learned so much from the past. When you look at operas of old, they were telling real human stories. And that's what I liked about this. It's all an expression and a reflection of society. And it's also a way in which we can grow and move forward. It creates safe spaces. And when we talk about equity and accessibility for all, it's free, even though you have to pay for it, because artists are due their own value, and so I think it's a beautiful reflection of humanity. And it's important that we all continue, all of us across this entire world, no matter where you go in the world, even to a tribe that's, been away from, the modern technology society, there's art. And so it's important and imperative for us to always be able to express who we are, because when we lose that, I think we lose humanity as a whole.
Beautifully said, April. Thank you for that. With that, I'm going to open it up to anyone who has any questions for our panelists for our last couple of minutes. Mark Abramowitz, I see your question about music. We will reach out to you about that. I know you want to hear some clips, and I'm sure that Rob can hook you up with a couple of clips to hear after this session. Does anyone else have any other questions for our panelists before we close today? This is your chance, your big chance to ask questions. If not, I cannot wait to see you all at the opera. Our panelists will be in attendance at the opera. So if you do come, you'll be able to see them, rub elbows, meet with them as people, and get to know a little bit more about them. So this is not one to be missed. I highly encourage you to see it. It was life-changing for me when I saw it back in Glimmerglass. And so I hope to see you all at the opera.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to our esteemed panels and to all of you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, everybody. Happy Sunday.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.